Sometimes the hardest part of being a parent isn't knowing what to do. It's wondering if you're failing the one person who believes in you most. Ben Travers had been asking himself that question every night for months, watching his 10-year-old son Max do homework by lamplight because the electricity had been shut off again. When Ben inherited his grandfather's abandoned train station, he thought it was just another burden. The old Millbrook Station was a crumbling mess, with broken windows and weeds growing through the platform. Ben saw demolition costs and wasted time. But Max saw something different. While exploring the dusty corners of the station, the boy discovered a hidden trapdoor beneath the old ticket booth. What he found underneath would lead them to a secret worth over $200 million. But when powerful people learn about what's buried in those forgotten tunnels, a father and son will discover that some treasures come with a dangerous price. How far would you go to give your child the future they deserve? Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The warehouse alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., the same as it had every morning for the past 8 months. Ben Travers rolled over in the narrow bed, his back protesting against the cheap mattress that had seen better decades. Through the thin walls of their one-bedroom apartment, he could hear Mrs. Rodriguez next door starting her coffee maker, a luxury he'd given up 3 utility bills ago. In the living room that doubled as Max's bedroom, his son slept peacefully. On the pull-out couch, homework still spread across the small table they'd rescued from a yard sale. The boy's math worksheet was covered in careful pencil marks, erased and rewritten until the paper had worn thin. Ben had helped him with the fractions the night before, working by the light of 2 battery-powered lanterns they'd bought when the power company had finally made good on their threats. Ben pulled on his work boots and grabbed his thermos of cold coffee. The warehouse job paid enough to keep them fed and housed, barely, but it was honest work loading trucks before dawn. His supervisor, Jimmy, was understanding about the days when Ben had to leave early for parent-teacher conferences, or when Max got sick. Understanding didn't pay the bills, but it kept food on the table and a roof over their heads. The weathered family photograph sat on the kitchen counter next to a stack of unpaid bills. It showed a much younger Ben standing between his parents at some long-forgotten Christmas, his grandfather Samuel in the background wearing his conductor's uniform. Ben barely remembered the old man. Samuel had been distant, even when Ben was young, working long hours at the railroad and spending his free time on mysterious projects in his workshop. After Ben's parents died in the car accident when he was 16, Samuel had done his duty, providing a place to stay until Ben graduated high school. But they'd never been close. Samuel spoke in clipped sentences about schedules and responsibilities, never about feelings or the future. When Max was born, Ben had sent Samuel a birth announcement. The reply had been a $50 savings bond and a brief note congratulating him on continuing the family line. That had been their only contact in over a decade. "Dad," Max's sleepy voice drifted from the living room. "You leaving for work?" "Yeah." "Buddy, Mrs. Chen said she'd walk you to school if you want. I left some cereal out for breakfast." Max appeared in the doorway, his dark hair sticking up at impossible angles, wearing the same clothes he'd worn yesterday. Ben made a mental note to tackle the laundry situation over the weekend. The boy had his mother's eyes, bright and curious, always looking for the story behind the surface. Sarah had been gone for 3 years now, taken by a cancer that had moved too fast for their limited insurance to keep up with. Sometimes Ben caught glimpses of her in the way Max tilted his head when he was thinking, or how he'd arrange his toys in precise patterns that only made sense to him. "Mr. Kellerman, I called yesterday while you were at work," Max said, settling at the small table with his bowl of cereal. "He said it was about your grandfather." Ben paused in the doorway. "What did you tell him?" "That you'd call him back. He seemed nice. He talked to me about trains for a while when I told him I liked them." Samuel Travers had died the previous month. The funeral had been small, Just Ben, Max, and a handful of elderly railroad workers who remembered when Samuel had been the most reliable conductor on the Eastern Line. Ben had felt obligated to attend, but grief hadn't come. Just a hollow sense of opportunities missed and words never spoken. The call to Mr. Kellerman revealed that Samuel had left Ben something in his will. The old Millbrook Station. Ben remembered the place vaguely from his childhood. A brick building on the edge of town where Samuel had worked before the line was decommissioned. It had been abandoned for decades, slowly surrendering to weather and neglect. Why would he leave me that old place? Ben had asked the lawyer. Your grandfather was quite specific about his wishes, Mr. Kellerman had replied. He said you'd understand. When the time was right, the property includes the station building, the platform, and about 3 acres of land. There's also an old passenger car that was left on the siding when the line closed. Ben finished his coffee and kissed Max goodbye, promising to pick him up from Mrs. Chen's after work. The older woman had become a blessing since Sarah's death, treating Max like the grandson she'd never had. Her small house across the hall always smelled like ginger tea and her homemade dumplings. She never asked for payment for watching Max, though Ben always left what he could on her kitchen table. The warehouse shift passed in a blur of boxes and loading schedules. Ben's mind kept drifting to the station and what Samuel might have been thinking when he'd made the bequest. The property was probably worth more as scrap than as real estate. The building would need major repairs and the land wasn't suitable for much besides storing junk. By afternoon, Ben had convinced himself to drive out and take a look. Max was excited about the prospect of seeing a real train station, even an abandoned one. Mrs. Chen packed them sandwiches and wished them luck on their adventure, as she called it. The drive to Millbrook Station took them through parts of town. That time had forgotten. Old neighborhoods where factory workers had once lived gave way to empty lots and shuttered businesses. The railroad tracks appeared beside the road, rusty and overgrown with weeds that reached as high as Ben's shoulders. There it is, Max said, pressing his face to the passenger window. Millbrook Station sat on a slight rise above the tracks, its red brick facade weathered, but still solid. The wooden platform stretched along the building's length, sagging in places, but intact. Tall windows marched across the front of the structure, some boarded up, others showing glimpses of the dark interior. A faded sign above the main entrance still proclaimed Millbrook Station, Esther 1923, in letters that had once been painted gold. The passenger car Samuel had mentioned sat on a siding about 50 yards from the station. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship from another era, with curved windows and decorative metalwork along its sides. Rust had claimed some of the exterior, but the basic structure looked sound. Ben parked near the station's front entrance and got out slowly, surveying the property with a contractor's eye. The roof appeared intact, though some shingles had come loose. The foundation looked solid. Railroad construction from that era had been built to last. But years of neglect had taken their toll. Broken windows would need replacing. The platform would require significant repair work, and there was no telling what condition the electrical and plumbing systems were in. Max bounded out of the car and ran toward the platform, his excitement infectious despite the circumstances. "Dad, look at this place. It's like something from a movie." Ben followed more slowly, pulling out the ring of keys Mr. Kellerman had given him. Samuel had been meticulous about maintaining his possessions, even in abandonment. The keys were labeled, in his careful handwriting, main entrance, platform door, office, storage. The main entrance opened with surprising ease, revealing a spacious waiting area with high ceilings and arched windows. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, filtering through the dirty glass. A long wooden bench ran along one wall, its surface worn smooth by decades of travelers. The ticket booth stood empty in the center of the room, its brass fittings tarnished but still elegant. "It's bigger than I thought it would be," Ben murmured, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. Max was already exploring, running his hands along the walls and peering into corners with the systematic thoroughness that had always amazed Ben. The boy had a gift for noticing details that adults missed, finding patterns and connections that seemed obvious once he pointed them out. "Dad, look at this," Max called from behind the ticket booth. He was crouched down, examining something on the floor. "There's a pattern in these tiles that's different from the others." Ben joined him and saw what his son meant. Most of the floor was covered in standard hexagonal tiles, but there was a rectangular section behind the booth where the pattern changed to an intricate design of interlocking circles and straight lines. "Probably just decorative," Ben said, though something about the pattern nagged at him. It reminded him of something he'd seen before, though he couldn't place where. They spent the next hour exploring the station. Most of the rooms were empty, though Samuel's old office still contained a desk and filing cabinet. The papers inside were mostly routine railroad documents, schedules, maintenance reports, employee records from the station's active years. But Max found something interesting tucked into the back of one drawer, a small brass device that looked like an oversized ticket punch. "What do you think it's for?" Max asked, turning the device over in his hands. The punch was heavier than it looked, made of solid brass with intricate engravings along its sides. Numbers were etched around the rim: 1923, 1947, 1952. The years didn't seem to follow any obvious pattern, but they meant something to someone who had taken the time to engrave them so carefully. "Probably for validating tickets," Ben said, though the device seemed too elaborate for such a simple function. "Your grandfather always said the railroad had a system for everything." As the afternoon wore on, Ben found himself seeing the station through Max's eyes. Where he saw repair costs and logistical headaches, his son saw possibilities. Max talked excitedly about turning the waiting area into a museum, or maybe a community center where people could learn about the town's railroad history. His enthusiasm was infectious, but Ben's practical side kept asserting itself. They couldn't afford to heat the building, much less restore it to its former glory. The passenger car proved to be in better condition than the station. Inside, the original velvet seats were faded but intact. The car's interior showed signs of careful maintenance. Samuel had clearly spent time here, keeping it clean and functional, even after the line had closed. "He must have really loved this place," Max said, settling into one of the seats and looking out through the curved windows at the overgrown tracks. Ben studied his son's profile, seeing Sarah's determination in the set of his jaw. Max had inherited his mother's ability to see beauty in broken things, to imagine what could be rather than accepting what was. "Maybe he did," Ben admitted. "I never really knew him well enough to say." They were preparing to leave when Max made his discovery. He'd wandered back into the station while Ben was locking up the passenger car, drawn by something he'd noticed earlier but hadn't fully examined. The brass ticket punch seemed to have some kind of mechanism built into it, not unlike the complex clockwork in an old watch. Ben found him kneeling behind the ticket booth, holding the device over the patterned section of floor tiles. "Dad, I think this goes with these tiles somehow," Max said. "See how the numbers on the punch match these marks in the floor pattern." Ben knelt beside his son and looked more carefully. Indeed, tiny numbers were etched into some of the tiles, barely visible unless you knew to look for them. When Max aligned the punch with the corresponding numbers and pressed down, something clicked. The rectangular section of patterned floor shifted slightly, revealing itself to be not just decorative, but functional. A hidden trapdoor, perfectly concealed by the tile design, had been unlocked by the brass key disguised as a ticket punch. Father and son stared at each other in amazement as cool air drifted up from whatever lay beneath Millbrook Station. Max's eyes were bright with curiosity and adventure. Ben felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension, the kind of feeling that comes when you realize your life is about to change in ways you can't predict or control. "Should we look?" Max whispered. Ben considered the question seriously. They had a right to explore. This was their property now. their inheritance from a grandfather who had apparently been more mysterious than anyone had realized. But something about the hidden entrance suggested secrets that Samuel had kept carefully guarded for decades. In the end, it was Max's curiosity that decided him. Sarah had always said that curiosity was a gift that should never be discouraged, even when it led to complications. And if Samuel had wanted them to find this, he wouldn't have left them the key. "Just a quick look," Ben said, "but we're careful, and we stick together." Max nodded solemnly, understanding that this was serious adult business now, not just an adventure. Together, they lifted the trapdoor fully open, revealing a set of stone steps leading down into darkness. The air that rose from below carried scents of old wood and machine oil, mixed with something Ben couldn't identify, a metallic smell like copper pennies or old watches. Ben clicked on his phone's flashlight and led the way down the steps, Max close behind him. The stairs were solid and well-maintained, leading to a tunnel that stretched away into the darkness in both directions. Railroad ties and steel rails ran along the tunnel floor, though these tracks looked different from the abandoned line outside. Narrower gauge, more precisely maintained. "It's like a whole different railroad down here," Max breathed. Ben moved his light along the tunnel walls, revealing ceramic tiles and brass fittings that spoke of careful engineering and substantial investment. This wasn't some amateur project or forgotten storage area. Someone had built this system with precision and purpose and had taken great care to keep it hidden from the world above. They followed the tunnel for about 20 yards before it opened into a larger chamber. Ben's flashlight beam revealed a space that took his breath away. A complete underground workshop and living area, preserved as if its occupant had just stepped out for a moment. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with tools and materials that gleamed despite the years of disuse. Precision instruments, clockwork mechanisms, and devices Ben couldn't begin to identify filled every available surface. In the center of the room stood a large desk covered with blueprints and technical drawings, held in place by glass paperweights that caught and reflected the light. Max moved toward the desk while Ben examined the workbenches. The tools were of exceptional quality. German precision instruments, Swiss clockmakers' devices, and American engineering equipment that must have cost a fortune when it was new. Everything was organized with obsessive care, each tool in its designated place. "Dad, you need to see this," Max called from the desk. Ben joined his son at the collection of papers and blueprints. The technical drawings were incredibly detailed, showing mechanical devices that seemed to combine clockwork, precision with electronic components. Dates on the documents ranged from 1947 to 1952, and many bore official stamps: U.S. government contract, classified, Department of Defense. At the top of the pile was a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth by years of handling. The name embossed in fading gold letters read Heinrich Zimmermann, Master Chronometer. Ben opened the journal carefully. The first page was written in English, though the handwriting showed traces of European training. The entry was dated September 15, 1947. Arrived at Millbrook Station today to begin work on Project Kronos. The government's requirements are ambitious, but the potential applications are revolutionary. If we can achieve the precision they require in a portable timepiece, it will change navigation, communications, and scientific measurement forever. Samuel Travers has been assigned as my liaison and assistant. He seems capable and trustworthy, though I suspect he understands more about the implications of this work than his supervisors realize. Ben looked at Max, who was reading over his shoulder with the same intensity he brought to his math homework. "Your great-grandfather knew about all this," Ben said softly. "And now we do too," Max replied. "But what is it exactly?" Ben turned the page and continued reading. Heinrich Zimmermann had been a German clockmaker and precision engineer, recruited by the U.S. government after the war to work on highly classified timing devices. The project involved creating chronometers accurate enough for military navigation and scientific research. using rare earth elements and techniques that were apparently decades ahead of their time. As they read deeper into the journal, the scope of Zimmerman's work became clear. He wasn't just making clocks, he was developing technology that could revolutionize how humans measured and used time. The applications ranged from submarine navigation to satellite communication. Though satellites were still theoretical in 1947. "This is incredible," Ben murmured. "If even half of this is true, Dad," Max interrupted, pointing to a passage near the bottom of the page they were reading. "Look at this part." The entry was dated December 3rd, 1952. "The project has been terminated unexpectedly. Government priorities have shifted, and there are concerns about the military applications of the technology. I have been ordered to destroy all prototypes and documentation, but I cannot bring myself to eliminate work that could benefit humanity in peacetime. Samuel has agreed to help me preserve what we have accomplished, hidden until the world is ready for its proper use." Ben closed the journal and looked around the workshop with new understanding. This wasn't just Samuel's hobby or hiding place, it was a treasure vault of scientific advancement hidden away for over 70 years. "We need to be very careful about this," he told Max. "This isn't just valuable, it could be dangerous if the wrong people find out about it." Max nodded seriously. "Should we tell someone?" "Not yet," Ben said. "Let's learn more about what we're dealing with first." They spent another hour in the workshop, discovering more journals, technical documentation, and what appeared to be partially completed prototypes of Zimmerman's chronometer designs. Everything was preserved in remarkable condition, protected by the underground environment and Samuel's careful maintenance over the decades. When they finally climbed back up to the station, Ben felt as if he was returning from another world. The mundane concerns of unpaid bills and warehouse schedules seemed less pressing compared to the mystery they'd uncovered beneath Millbrook Station. Max was unusually quiet on the drive home, processing what they'd discovered. Finally, as he pulled into their apartment complex, he spoke. "Dad, I think Great-Grandpa Samuel left us more than just a train station." "What do you mean?" "He left us a responsibility," Max said. "Like in the stories Mum used to read me, where someone has to guard something important until the right time comes." Ben looked at his son, amazed once again by the boy's insight. Sarah would have been proud of how thoughtful and mature Max was, becoming even in the face of extraordinary circumstances. That night, after Max had gone to sleep, Ben sat at their small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and stared at the weathered family photograph. Samuel Travers looked back at him from the background of that long-ago Christmas, wearing his conductor's uniform and the slight smile of a man who kept his own counsel. "What were you thinking, old man?" Ben whispered to the photograph. "What did you expect me to do with all this?" But even as he asked the question, Ben felt he was beginning to understand. Samuel had waited until Ben was a father himself, until he had someone to protect and provide for. The station wasn't just a building, it was a test of character, a chance to choose between easy money and something more valuable. The question was, what would that choice ultimately cost them? Ben couldn't concentrate on work the next morning. The image of that underground workshop kept flashing through his mind as he loaded trucks in the pre-dawn darkness. Every precision instrument, every carefully preserved blueprint, every page of Heinrich Zimmermann's journal suggested they had stumbled onto something far more significant than an abandoned train station. During his lunch break, Ben tried researching Project Kronos and Heinrich Zimmermann on his phone, but found almost nothing. A few academic references mentioned advances in chronometer technology in the early 1950s, and one obscure historical footnote about German scientists recruited after the war, but no details that matched what they'd discovered. The absence of information was almost as telling as finding it would have been. Someone had worked very hard to erase Heinrich Zimmermann from the public record. Ben picked Max up from school that afternoon with a plan to return to the station. He'd brought a proper flashlight, some basic tools, and a digital camera to document what they'd found. Max bounced in the passenger seat, full of questions and theories about their discovery. "Do you think the government is still looking for this stuff?" Max asked as they drove toward Millbrook Station. "I don't know, buddy. It's been over 70 years. The people who originally commissioned the work are probably all gone by now. But what if they're not? What if there are still people who know about it?" Ben glanced at his son, struck by the boy's instinctive understanding of the situation's complexity. Max had always been mature for his age, but losing his mother had accelerated his awareness of how unpredictable and sometimes dangerous the adult world could be. "We'll be careful," Ben promised. "We'll learn what we can, and then we'll figure out the right thing to do." The station looked different in the late afternoon light, less abandoned, more expectant, as if it had been waiting decades for someone to return and unlock its secrets. Ben parked in the same spot as the day before, and they made their way inside, moving with the confident familiarity of people who belonged there. Max headed straight for the ticket booth and the brass punch mechanism. He'd been thinking about it all night, Ben could tell. The boy had that focused intensity he got when working through a complex problem. "I want to try something," Max said, kneeling beside the hidden trapdoor they'd discovered. "Yesterday we just pressed it down like a regular ticket punch, but look at these markings more carefully." Ben crouched beside his son and examined the brass device under the beam of his flashlight. The numbers etched around the rim, 1923, 1947, 1952, were more than just dates. They were positioned at specific points that corresponded to tiny notches in the metal. "It's not just a key," Max said, his voice filled with excitement. "It's like a combination lock. See how it rotates? I think you're supposed to align different numbers with this mark here." Max pointed to a small arrow carved into the brass handle. As he rotated the device, the numbers clicked into position with satisfying precision. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Even after 70 years, the mechanism moved smoothly and locked into place with clockwork accuracy. "Try the first number," Ben suggested. 1923. That's when the station was built. Max aligned 1923 with the arrow mark and pressed down. Nothing happened. He tried 1947, then 1952, but the hidden floor panel remained sealed. "Maybe it's a sequence," Max mused. He rotated the device to 1923, pressed lightly, then moved to 1947 and pressed again, then finally to 1952. This time, the mechanism responded with a series of soft clicks that seemed to come from beneath the floor. But instead of the single panel opening as it had before, they heard something else, a deeper mechanical sound, like gears engaging somewhere in the building's structure. "What was that?" Ben asked, looking around the station waiting room. The sound had come from behind them, near the old station master's office. Ben led the way with his flashlight, Max close behind. The office door, which had been locked the day before, now stood slightly ajar. Inside, the room looked much as they'd left it. Samuel's old desk, filing cabinets, railroad memorabilia on the walls. But something had changed. The large railway map that dominated one wall had shifted, revealing a gap behind it. Ben approached the map carefully and found that it was hinged like a cabinet door. Behind it was a small alcove containing another set of controls, brass switches and dials that matched the aesthetic of the ticket punch mechanism. "It's like a puzzle," Max breathed. The ticket punch was just the first step. One of the switches was marked with the same arrow symbol they'd seen on the punch device. Ben flipped it, and immediately they heard the sound of machinery coming to life somewhere deep in the building. Lights began to flicker on in the alcove, powered by some hidden electrical system that had been dormant for decades. A brass plate in the center of the control panel bore an inscription in the same careful script they'd seen in Zimmerman's journal: "For the protection of knowledge and the wisdom to use it well. HZ and ST." Heinrich Zimmerman and Samuel Travers had built more than just a hiding place. They'd created a security system designed to reveal their secrets only to someone patient and careful enough to solve their puzzles. Max was studying a series of numbered dials below the inscription. "Dad, I think these correspond to something in the workshop downstairs, like coordinates or a combination for something else." They made their way back to the hidden trapdoor, which now opened more easily than before. The tunnel below was no longer dark. Electric lights had come on along the walls, revealing the full scope of the underground system. What they'd seen the day before was just the beginning. The tunnel extended much further than they'd realized, branching off in multiple directions. Rail lines disappeared into darkness, and side passages led to areas they hadn't yet explored. The whole system was larger and more complex than anything that could have been built without significant resources and official authorization. In the main workshop, new areas had been revealed. Panels in the walls had slid back, exposing additional workbenches and storage areas. But most significantly, a large vault door at the far end of the room now stood open, its combination lock apparently triggered by the sequence of operations they'd completed upstairs. "This is incredible," Ben murmured as they approached the vault. "Your great-grandfather and this Zimmerman guy thought of everything." Inside the vault, the temperature was noticeably cooler, and the air felt different, drier, more controlled. Climate preservation, Ben realized. Whatever was stored here had been protected not just from discovery, but from deterioration. The vault contained dozens of wooden crates, each labeled with precise handwriting and sealed with wax. Some bore the stamps of the U.S. government. Others had markings in German that neither Ben nor Max could read. But it was the largest crate, positioned in the center of the vault, that drew their attention. This one was different from the others, made of polished wood with brass fittings and locked with a mechanism that looked like a smaller version of the ticket punch device. A brass plate on the lid bore the inscription, "Chronos Prime Prototype, Final Version, Not for Military Application." Max ran his fingers along the brass fittings, tracing the intricate engravings that covered every surface. "It's beautiful," he said softly, "like a treasure chest." "That's probably exactly what it is," Ben replied. "The question is, do we have the right to open it?" They stood in silence for a moment, father and son contemplating the weight of their decision. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was about choosing whether to respect the boundaries Samuel and Zimmerman had established, or pushing forward into territory that might be dangerous for reasons they didn't fully understand. The choice was made for them by the sound of voices echoing down from the station above. "Told you someone's been here recently?" a man's voice was saying. "Fresh tire tracks, and the front door's been opened." "Doesn't mean they found anything," a woman replied. "The old man kept his secrets for 70 years. Doubt his grandson is smart enough to figure them out in 2 days. Ben felt Max stiffen beside him. They weren't alone anymore, and whoever was upstairs knew about Samuel's secrets. Ben put a protective hand on his son's shoulder and motioned for silence. "Check the office," the man continued. "If the kid's been poking around, he might have triggered something. The old security system was designed to be tamper-evident." Footsteps moved across the floor above their heads, accompanied by the sound of furniture being shifted and drawers being opened. Professional searchers, Ben realized. People who knew what they were looking for and had the skills to find it. "Here," the woman called. "Behind the map. The controls have been activated recently. Look at these dust patterns. Damn, that means they've been downstairs. We need to move fast before they come back, or tell someone else." Ben's mind raced through their options. The tunnel system had multiple branches. There might be another way out, but Max was with him, and he couldn't risk his son's safety by trying to navigate unfamiliar underground passages while being pursued by people who clearly had their own agenda. The decision was taken out of his hands when the lights suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in a dim red glow. But the message was clear. Whoever was upstairs had found the main controls. "Dad," Max whispered, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "There's something I didn't tell you about yesterday." "What?" "When we were leaving, I saw a car parked down the road. It looked like it was watching the station. I thought it was weird, but I didn't want to worry you." Ben felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. They'd been observed, possibly from the moment they'd first visited the station. The watchers had waited, letting Ben and Max do the work of unlocking Samuel's security system before moving in to claim whatever prizes lay hidden below. "We need to get out of here," Ben said quietly. But first, he moved quickly to the largest crate and examined the locking mechanism. It was similar to the ticket punch device, but more complex. Without time to solve its puzzle, they'd have to leave Zimmerman's most important work behind. "Wait," Max said, pulling something from his pocket. It was the original brass ticket punch they'd found in Samuel's desk. "What if this opens it too?" The boy was right. The punch device fit perfectly into the lock mechanism on the crate. When Max turned it, the lock released with a soft click, and the lid lifted to reveal layers of protective padding. Inside, nestled in custom-fitted cushions, was the most beautiful timepiece Ben had ever seen. It wasn't large, about the size of a pocket watch, but every surface was covered with intricate engravings and precision-crafted details. Dozens of tiny dials and gauges covered the face, and the hands moved with microscopic precision even though the device hadn't been wound in decades. But it was more than just a chronometer. Attached to the main timepiece were additional modules, electronic components that looked decades ahead of their time, connected with hair-thin wires and sealed in what appeared to be crystal housings. "Take it," Ben said urgently. The voices upstairs were getting closer to discovering the trapdoor entrance. "We can't let them have it." Max carefully lifted the device from its cushioned case. It was heavier than it looked, and Ben could feel the precision engineering in its weight and balance. This wasn't just a prototype. It was a masterpiece of scientific achievement, hidden away for over 70 years. They moved toward the tunnel entrance as quietly as possible, but their luck ran out when a beam of light suddenly illuminated the workshop from above. "There," the woman's voice called. "They're down there now." Ben grabbed Max's hand and ran toward the deepest part of the tunnel system, hoping to find another exit before their pursuers could make it down the stairs. Behind them, the sounds of people descending into the underground workshop grew louder and more urgent. Whatever secrets Samuel and Heinrich Zimmermann had died protecting, Ben and Max were now the guardians of that legacy, and they were no longer the only ones who knew about it. The hunt for the $200 million secret had begun. Ben's heart pounded as he led Max deeper into the tunnel system, the precious chronometer clutched in his son's hands. Behind them, flashlight beams swept across the workshop as their pursuers reached the bottom of the stairs. "Which way?" Ben whispered, facing a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. Max paused, studying the rail lines that disappeared into each passage. Even in crisis, his analytical mind was working. "The middle track looks more worn," he said quietly, "like it was used more often." They took the middle passage, moving as quickly as they dared in the dim emergency lighting. The tunnel curved gradually to the right, and Ben realized they were probably following the path of the old underground mail system that Zimmerman's journal had mentioned. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, they reached another chamber. This one was smaller than the main workshop, but it contained something that made Ben's breath catch: Heinrich Zimmermann's personal journal, along with dozens of other notebooks and technical documents. The journal lay open on a small desk, as if Zimmermann had been in the middle of writing when he'd been interrupted. Max set the chronometer down carefully and picked up the journal, his eyes wide as he read the handwritten entries by flashlight. "Dad, listen to this," Max whispered, reading from the open page. "June 15th, 1952. The government has decided that Project Kronos is too dangerous to continue. They fear that precise timing technology could be used to synchronize weapon systems or coordinate attacks. But they fail to understand that the same precision that could enable destruction could also revolutionize navigation, communication, and scientific research. Samuel and I have decided that this knowledge must be preserved, hidden until humanity is mature enough to use it for peaceful purposes. Ben felt a chill as he processed the implications. They weren't just holding a valuable antique. They were carrying technology that could change the world, hidden away because its creators believed mankind wasn't ready for it. "Keep reading," Ben urged, listening for sounds of pursuit while Max turned the pages. July 3rd, 1952. We have completed construction of the preservation system. The station above will appear abandoned, but everything we have accomplished will be maintained in perfect condition. The security protocols will ensure that only someone with patience, intelligence, and proper moral character can access our work. Samuel's grandson shows promise. If the bloodline continues, perhaps one day a Travers will return who can be trusted with this responsibility. Max looked up from the journal, his young face serious in the flashlight's glow. He was writing. "About you, Dad, and maybe about me too." The weight of inherited responsibility settled on Ben's shoulders like a physical burden. Samuel hadn't just left them property, he'd passed on a trust that had been maintained for 7 decades, waiting for the right moment and the right people. They continued through the journals, discovering the full scope of Zimmerman's work. The chronometer Max carried wasn't just about timekeeping. It incorporated rare Earth elements and precision engineering that could enable GPS-level navigation accuracy decades before satellites existed. In 1952, such technology would have been revolutionary. In the present day, understanding its principles could still advance navigation and timing systems by generations. "Look at this," Max said, pointing to a technical drawing that showed the chronometer's internal structure. "These components aren't just mechanical, they're electronic too, but this was designed in 1952, before transistors were even common." Ben studied the diagram, seeing similarities to modern atomic clock technology and GPS systems. Zimmerman had been working with concepts that wouldn't become mainstream for another 50 years. The applications were staggering. Submarines could navigate underwater with unprecedented accuracy. Aircraft could fly precise routes without ground-based navigation aids, and scientific experiments requiring precise timing could be conducted anywhere in the world. "No wonder the government was worried," Ben murmured. "In the wrong hands, this could coordinate attacks or weapon systems with incredible precision. But in the right hands," Max said, his voice filled with wonder, "it could help people. Ships could navigate safely, planes wouldn't get lost, explorers could map new territories accurately." The sound of voices echoing through the tunnels reminded them that they weren't alone with their discovery. The pursuers had apparently split up, exploring different passages in their search. "We need to keep moving," Ben said, but Max was already gathering the most important journals and technical documents. "We can't leave these," the boy said, with determination that reminded Ben of Sarah's fierce protectiveness. "If those people get them, we'll never know what Zimmerman and great-grandpa Samuel really intended." Ben helped Max stuff the essential documents into a canvas bag they found in the chamber. The chronometer went into a protective case that had been designed specifically for it, lined with soft fabric and sealed against moisture and shock. They continued deeper into the tunnel system, discovering that it was even more extensive than they'd imagined. Side passages led to storage areas, maintenance shops, and what appeared to be living quarters where someone could stay for extended periods. Zimmerman and Samuel had created not just a hiding place, but a complete underground facility. In one of the storage areas, they found supplies that had been carefully preserved: water, non-perishable food, blankets, and even a small generator with fuel that had been treated to prevent degradation. The two men had prepared for the possibility that their secret might need to be protected by someone living underground for weeks or months. They thought of everything, Ben said, impressed despite their circumstances by the thoroughness of the preparation. Max had found something else, a detailed map of the entire tunnel system, hand-drawn with the same precision that characterized everything Zimmerman touched. The map showed multiple exits, including one that led to the basement of a building several blocks away from the station. There, Max pointed to a passage marked with Samuel's initials. That goes under Main Street and comes up in the old hardware store building. If we can reach that exit, we'll be away from whoever's following us. They gathered their supplies and continued through the tunnels, using the map to navigate toward the distant exit. The passage was longer than Ben had expected, and he realized that the underground system extended beneath most of the old downtown area. Zimmerman and Samuel had essentially built a hidden city beneath the forgotten neighborhood. As they walked, Max continued reading from the journals, sharing discoveries that painted a picture of two men who had sacrificed their careers and personal recognition to protect knowledge they believed could benefit humanity. "Listen to this entry from August 1952, Max read by flashlight as they walked. Samuel has proven himself to be more than just an assistant. He is a true partner in this endeavor. His understanding of both the technical and moral implications of our work gives me confidence that the right choice will be made when the time comes. He has agreed to guard our secret until his family line produces someone with the wisdom to use it properly." Samuel never said anything about any of this. "When I was growing up," Ben said, "he was always so quiet, so focused on routine and responsibility. I never imagined he was carrying something this significant." "Maybe that was part of protecting it," Max suggested with insight that continued to amaze his father. "If he had talked about it, people might have gotten suspicious. By being boring and predictable, he made sure nobody would think he was hiding anything important." They reached the exit passage after nearly an hour of careful navigation. The tunnel led to a metal door that opened with a key they found hanging on a hook nearby. Another example of Zimmerman and Samuel's careful planning. The door opened into the basement of what had once been Millbrook Hardware, now empty but structurally sound. Stairs led up to the main floor, and windows showed them the familiar streets of the old downtown area. They were 3 blocks from the station, but they could see police cars and unmarked vehicles surrounding the building. Their pursuers hadn't just been random treasure hunters. They were part of something larger and more organized. "We need to get home," Ben said. "But first, we need to figure out who those people are and what they really want." Max was studying the chronometer in its protective case, his young mind already working through the implications of their discovery. "Dad, what if we're not the only ones who know about this technology? What if there are other people who have been looking for it for decades?" Ben felt a chill as he considered the possibility. If Zimmerman's work was as revolutionary as it appeared, there could be government agencies, corporations, or foreign powers who had been searching for it since the 1950s. Samuel's death might have been the trigger that brought them out of hiding, finally ending their long wait. They made their way carefully through the empty hardware store and out onto Main Street, trying to look like a father and son on a casual evening walk. But Ben felt exposed and vulnerable, knowing that somewhere nearby, professional searchers were trying to track down the most valuable secret in the history of their small town. The chronometer in Max's backpack felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and every step took them deeper into a mystery that would change their lives forever. They made it home without incident, but Ben felt eyes watching them from the shadows. Their small apartment had never felt more like a sanctuary, though he knew it was probably temporary safety at best. Max spread Zimmerman's documents across their kitchen table while Ben made sandwiches, both of them too keyed up to feel hungry, but knowing they needed to eat. The government contract documents were the most revealing. Official letterhead, signatures, and stamps that confirmed everything they'd discovered was legitimate. "Look at this," Max said. holding up a carbon copy of a requisition form. They ordered enough rare earth materials to build 50 chronometers, but Zimmerman's notes say he only completed one prototype before the project was cancelled. Ben studied the document over his son's shoulder. The implications were staggering. If Zimmerman had been working with materials worth millions in today's market, and if the government had provided enough supplies for 50 devices, there might be a fortune in raw materials hidden somewhere in the tunnel system. That's not the most important part, Ben said, pointing to the signature at the bottom of the requisition. Look who authorized this purchase. The signature belonged to someone identified as Director, Advanced Research Division, Department of Defense. Below it, in smaller print, was a stamp. Project Chronos, classification level, top secret, compartmented information. Max looked up from the document, his young face serious. Dad, what does compartmented information mean? It means that even people with top secret clearance weren't allowed to know about this, unless they had a specific need to know, Ben explained. This wasn't just classified, it was one of the government's deepest secrets. They spent the next hour going through the documents, piecing together the scope of Project Chronos. The technology went far beyond simple timekeeping. Zimmerman had been developing a complete navigation and communication system based on precision, timing decades ahead of anything that existed in the 1950s. The phone rang, startling them both. Ben hesitated, then answered on the third ring. Mr. Travers? The voice was calm, professional, with just a hint of an accent Ben couldn't place. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Reeves. I represent certain parties who have an interest in your grandfather's estate. I'm sorry, Dr. Reeves, but I'm not interested in selling the property, Ben said carefully. I think there may be some misunderstanding, she replied smoothly. We're not interested in the real estate. We understand that your grandfather may have been the custodian of certain materials that belong to our organization. Ben felt his blood turn cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Travers, I think it would be beneficial for all parties if we could meet and discuss this matter. There are significant financial incentives for cooperation and equally significant consequences for obstruction. The line went dead. Ben stared at the phone, his hands shaking slightly. Who was that? Max asked. Someone who knows about what we found, Ben replied. And I don't think they're going to just ask nicely. Ben triple-checked the locks on their apartment door and closed all the curtains. They needed time to think, to understand what they were dealing with, and to figure out their next move. Max had continued reading through Zimmerman's journal while Ben took the phone call. Dad, there's something else you need to see, he said quietly. The boy had found an entry dated September 1952, written in Zimmerman's careful script. I have become aware that certain parties within the government never intended for Project Chronos to be cancelled. There is a faction that believes the technology should be weaponized regardless of the official termination order. They have made inquiries about accessing our work, and I fear they will not respect the decision to classify this research as too dangerous to continue. Samuel and I have decided to take more extreme measures to protect what we have accomplished. The next entry was even more disturbing. We have evidence that our laboratory has been surveilled, and there have been attempts to access our work through unofficial channels. The chronometer technology could enable precision guidance systems for weapons that would make current military capabilities obsolete. We cannot allow such power to fall into the hands of those who would use it to cause harm. The prototype and all supporting materials will be secured where they cannot be found or accessed without proper authorization. Ben felt the weight of their situation settling on him like a physical burden. They weren't just holding valuable technology. They were caught in the middle of a conflict that had been brewing for 70 years. There's more, Max said, turning to a page near the end of the journal. Zimmerman writes about people following him, his workshop being searched when he was away, and government officials asking questions that weren't part of the official project briefings. Ben read the final entries, which painted a picture of Two men who had realized they were protecting something too dangerous to trust to any government or organization. Zimmerman had become convinced that the only safe place for his technology was hidden away, until humanity evolved enough to use it responsibly. The last entry was dated October 15th, 1952. Samuel and I have completed the preservation protocols. The chronometer and all supporting materials are now secured in a location where they will remain safe for generations if necessary. I have destroyed all copies of the technical specifications, and Samuel has agreed to maintain the secret until his family line produces someone with the moral character to make proper use of what we have preserved. If you are reading this, young Travers, then that person is likely you. Max looked up from the journal, his eyes wide with understanding. He was writing to you, Dad, or to me. He knew that someday one of us would find this. Ben felt a strange mixture of honor and terror at being chosen for such responsibility. Samuel had spent decades protecting a secret that could change the world, waiting for the right moment to pass on that burden. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Ben motioned for Max to stay quiet and approached the peephole. Carefully, Mrs. Chen stood in the hallway, holding a covered dish and looking around nervously. Ben opened the door cautiously. "Mrs. Chen, is everything okay?" "I brought you soup," she said, but her voice carried an undertone of worry. "Ben, there were men asking about you and Max today. They said they were from the government, but they didn't seem right to me." Ben felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of questions? About your work schedule, about Max's school, about whether you had family or friends who might help you with things?" Mrs. Chen stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Ben, I've seen men like this before during the war. They weren't just asking questions, they were learning your patterns, your weaknesses." Ben accepted the soup with gratitude and genuine concern. For his neighbor's safety. "Mrs. Chen, I think it might be better if you stayed away from us for a while. Whatever's happening, I don't want you getting caught in the middle of it." "Nonsense," the elderly woman said firmly. "You helped me when my husband died, and Max is like a grandson to me. If someone is threatening my family, they will have to deal with me too." Her fierce loyalty was touching, but Ben knew he couldn't risk involving Mrs. Chen in something that could be dangerous. These weren't ordinary criminals or bureaucrats. They were people who had been searching for Zimmerman's technology for decades, and they wouldn't let anything or anyone stand in their way. After Mrs. Chen left, Ben and Max resumed their study of the documents. They found technical specifications that confirmed the chronometer's revolutionary capabilities, manufacturing notes that detailed the rare earth elements used in its construction, and most significantly, a complete set of blueprints that could theoretically be used to reproduce Zimmerman's work. This is what they really want, Ben realized, holding up the blueprints. The chronometer itself is priceless as a prototype, but these plans would allow someone to manufacture the technology on a large scale. Max studied the technical drawings with the same intensity he brought to his math homework. "Dad, look at these calculations. If this technology really works the way Zimmerman designed it, it would be better than modern GPS systems. Ships and planes could navigate anywhere in the world with perfect accuracy, even without satellites. And weapons could be guided with the same precision," Ben added grimly. "That's why the government was scared in 1952 and why people are still looking for it now." They were sitting with the power to revolutionize navigation, communication, and scientific research, or to enable weapon systems that could change the balance of military power around the world. The responsibility was overwhelming, but Ben was beginning to understand why Samuel had waited so long to pass it on. The question now was, what were they going to do with it? Outside their apartment, a car engine started and drove slowly away. Ben moved to the window and peered through the curtains, but saw only empty street and shadows. Still, the message was clear. They were being watched, and their time to make a decision was running out. Ben barely slept that night, alternating between studying Zimmerman's documents and checking the windows for signs of surveillance. Max had fallen asleep at the kitchen table, his head pillowed on his arms next to the open journal, and Ben didn't have the heart to wake him. The boy looked peaceful, unaware of the weight of the secret they now carried. At dawn, Ben made coffee and tried to think through their options rationally. They could turn everything over to the authorities, but which authorities? The people who had been in the tunnels the night before had moved with professional efficiency. They might already have connections within law enforcement or government agencies. They could try to sell the technology, but to whom? The value was so enormous that any potential buyer would want to verify its authenticity, which would require revealing their identities and location. And once word got out, they would become targets for anyone who wanted to claim the technology for themselves. The third option was the one that both attracted and terrified Ben. They could try to honor Zimmerman and Samuel's original intent, protecting the technology until they could find a way to use it for peaceful purposes. Max stirred as the morning light filled their small kitchen. He sat up slowly, blinking in confusion at the papers spread across the table. "I dreamed we found a treasure," he said sleepily. "We did," Ben replied. "The question is what we're going to do with it." Over breakfast, they discussed their situation. With the same serious consideration Ben might have given to a major financial decision, Max's insights continued to surprise him. The boy had inherited not just Sarah's curiosity, but her ability to see through complexity to the heart of a problem. "The people who called you yesterday," Max said, stirring his cereal thoughtfully. "They said the materials belonged to their organization. But Zimmerman's journal says the government cancelled the project and ordered everything destroyed. So, who do these people work for?" Ben had been wondering the same thing. Maybe they're people who disagreed with the cancellation order. Zimmerman wrote about factions within the government who wanted to continue the project for military purposes. Or maybe they're not government at all, Max suggested. Maybe they're people who found out about the project and have been looking for the technology ever since. The possibility that they were dealing with foreign agents or private corporations made Ben's situation feel even more precarious. At least government agencies had some accountability and oversight. Criminal organizations or foreign intelligence services would have no such constraints. Ben's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something told him he needed to answer. Mr. Travers, the same professional voice from the night before. "I hope you've had time to consider our conversation." "Dr. Reeves," Ben said carefully, "I told you I don't know what you're talking about." "Mr. Travers, we know you were at the station yesterday evening. We know you accessed the underground facility, and we know you removed certain materials that belong to us." Ben felt his mouth go dry. They had been watched more closely than he'd realized. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Ben said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I inherited an old train station from my grandfather. I haven't taken anything that doesn't belong to me." "Your grandfather was a custodian, Mr. Travers, not an owner. The materials he were protecting were always intended to be returned to proper authority when the time was right, and you represent that authority? We represent parties with legitimate claim to Heinrich Zimmerman's work," Dr. Reeves replied smoothly. "I'm prepared to offer you substantial compensation for your cooperation. Shall we say $2 million for the return of all materials?" Ben nearly dropped the phone. $2 million would solve every financial problem he'd ever had, give Max opportunities Ben had never dreamed of providing. But something in Dr. Reeves's tone suggested the offer came with strings attached. "I need time to think about this," Ben said. "Of course. But Mr. Travers, I should mention that our organization has been very patient for a very long time. That patience isn't unlimited." The call ended, leaving Ben staring at the phone with a mixture of temptation and fear. $2 million, Max asked quietly. He'd been listening to the conversation with the focused attention that meant he was working through all the implications. "That's what she said. Dad, If they're willing to offer that much, without even seeing what we have, how much do you think it's really worth? Ben looked at his son with new respect. Max had gone straight to the heart of the matter. People didn't offer $2 million for something worth less than 10 times that amount. They spent the morning researching rare earth elements and precision chronometer technology on Ben's laptop. What they found was sobering. The materials alone in Zimmerman's prototype would be worth millions at current market prices, but the real value was in the technology itself. Navigation systems based on Zimmerman's principles could revolutionize everything from shipping to aviation to space exploration. Look at this article, Max said, pointing to a technical paper about atomic clock accuracy. Modern GPS systems depend on timing accuracy measured in nanoseconds, but Zimmerman's notes talk about precision in picoseconds. That's 1,000 times more accurate. Ben read over his son's shoulder, trying to understand the implications. What could you do with that kind of timing precision? Anything, Max said, with the wonder of someone discovering a new universe. You could navigate underwater, underground, even in space without any external reference points. You could synchronize communications across any distance. You could measure time and distance more accurately than anything we have now. The magnitude of their discovery was overwhelming. They weren't just holding a valuable antique. They had technology that could advance human civilization by decades. Their research was interrupted by a knock at the door. Ben approached cautiously, expecting to see Mrs. Chen, or perhaps someone less welcome. Instead, he found a delivery man holding a package addressed to him. "Ben Travers?" the man asked. Ben signed for the package hesitantly. It was from an address he didn't recognize, with no return name. Inside, wrapped in expensive paper, was an antique pocket watch and a note written in elegant handwriting. "Mr. Travers," the note read, "this timepiece belonged to Heinrich Zimmermann. It was given to my grandfather as a token of friendship when they worked together on certain projects in the 1950s. My family has preserved it in the hope that someday it might be reunited with Dr. Zimmermann's other work. If you have found what I believe you have found, this watch may help you understand its proper use. The inscription on the back will guide you. Sincerely, Margaret Chen." Ben stared at the note, then looked at Max. "Mrs. Chen. She never told us her first name was Margaret," Max said, but he was already examining the pocket watch with fascination. The timepiece was beautiful, gold case, crystal face and movement, so precise that Ben could hear the individual tick of each second. But it was the inscription on the back that made his breath catch. "For Samuel Travers, guardian of time and keeper of secrets. With gratitude and trust, H. Zimmermann, 1952. Dad," Max said quietly, "I think Mrs. Chen knows more about this than she's been telling us." Ben felt pieces of a decades-old puzzle clicking into place. Mrs. Chen's knowledge of dangerous men, her fierce protectiveness, her unexplained presence in their lives, it all made sense if she was connected to Zimmermann's story. A soft tap on the door made them both freeze. Ben approached the peephole carefully and saw Mrs. Chen standing in the hallway, but this time she looked different, more alert, more purposeful. Ben opened the door, and she stepped inside quickly, locking it behind her. "You received the package," she said, looking at the pocket watch in Max's hands. "Mrs. Chen, what's going on?" Ben asked. "My name is Margaret Chen, and I have been waiting 70 years to have this conversation," she said, settling into a chair, with the authority of someone accustomed to being in charge. "My grandfather was Dr. James Chen, Heinrich Zimmermann's assistant before Samuel Travers took over that role. When the project was cancelled, my grandfather was ordered to ensure that all traces of the technology were destroyed. Instead, he helped Zimmermann and Samuel hide it." Ben sat down heavily, trying to process this revelation. "You've known about this all along." "I have been watching the Travers family for 3 generations," Mrs. Chen said calmly. "My grandfather made me promise to protect Zimmermann's secret until the right person came along to claim it. Samuel wasn't ready. He was too cautious, too afraid of the responsibility. But you, Ben, and especially Max, you have the combination of courage and moral judgment that Zimmerman was looking for. Max looked up from the pocket watch, his young face serious. So you've been testing us? In a way, yes, Mrs. Chen admitted. But also protecting you. The people who contacted you yesterday are not the only ones who have been searching for Zimmerman's technology. There are at least 3 different organizations that I know of, and possibly more. Who are they? Ben asked. One group represents certain elements within the US government that never accepted the cancellation of Project Kronos. Another is a consortium of private military contractors who believe the technology could give them decisive advantages in the weapons market. The third is foreign intelligence, though I'm not certain which country. Ben felt the walls of their small apartment closing in around them. So no matter what we do, someone's going to come after us. Unless we're very smart about how we handle this, Mrs. Chen said. Zimmerman and my grandfather planned for this possibility. The pocket watch is more than just a keepsake. It's a key to the next level of security they built into their system. She showed them how to open a hidden compartment in the watch case, revealing a small piece of paper with coordinates written in Zimmerman's careful script. There is another facility, Mrs. Chen explained. Deeper underground, more secure, containing materials that make what you found yesterday look like a child's toy, but it can only be accessed by someone who has proven their trustworthiness by protecting the first discovery. Ben stared at the coordinates, realizing that their adventure was far from over. How much more is there? Enough to change the world, Mrs. Chen said simply. The question is, are you ready for that responsibility? The coordinates led them to an area Ben had never explored, despite living in the town his entire life. According to Mrs. Chen's explanation, the location was beneath the old city cemetery, accessed through a maintenance building that had been abandoned for decades. We'll go tonight, Mrs. Chen said with the calm authority of someone who had been planning this moment for years. The people watching you will expect you to stay home after their phone call. We'll use that assumption against them. Ben felt like he was being swept along by forces beyond his control, but Max seemed energized by the prospect of deeper mysteries. The boy had spent the afternoon studying Zimmerman's pocket watch, discovering that its apparently simple mechanism contained hidden complications that regulated additional functions beyond basic timekeeping. It's like a computer made out of gears, Max explained to Ben as they prepared for their evening expedition. Each additional dial measures something different: temperature, humidity, magnetic variation, even atmospheric pressure. Zimmerman wasn't just making a chronometer, he was making a complete environmental monitoring system. Mrs. Chen had provided them with proper equipment for their underground exploration. Professional flashlights, rope, tools for opening sealed containers, and most importantly, a device that looked like a miniature version of Zimmerman's chronometer. This will help us navigate the deeper facility, she explained. Zimmerman designed the security systems to respond to specific timing sequences. Without proper chronometric guidance, the tunnels can be very dangerous. They waited until after midnight before leaving the apartment. Mrs. Chen moved with surprising stealth for her age, leading them through back alleys and forgotten paths that avoided the main streets where surveillance might be watching. The cemetery was older than Ben had realized, with headstones dating back to the 1800s. The maintenance building sat in a corner of the property, half hidden by overgrown trees and looking like it had been forgotten by time itself. Mrs. Chen produced an antique key that opened the building's door with surprising ease. Inside, what appeared to be a simple storage shed for groundskeeping equipment revealed its secret when she manipulated a hidden mechanism behind a cabinet of rakes and shovels. A section of the floor lifted away, revealing stairs that descended, much deeper than the tunnels they'd explored beneath the train station. These steps were carved from solid stone and lit by the same type of electric system they'd seen in Zimmerman's workshop. This facility was Zimmerman's primary laboratory, Mrs. Chen explained as they descended. The workshop beneath the station was just for routine maintenance and storage. This is where he conducted his most advanced research. The stairs led to a corridor that stretched further than their flashlight beams could penetrate. Unlike the tunnel system beneath the station, this passage was wider and taller, designed for moving substantial equipment. Rail tracks ran along the floor, but these were different from standard railroad gauge. They were precision-built for transporting delicate scientific instruments. "How long has this been here?" Ben asked, amazed by the scope of construction that had been hidden beneath. "Their town for 7 decades. Construction began in 1948, completed in 1951, Mrs. Chen replied. "My grandfather supervised the work, using railroad crews who thought they were building an extended freight tunnel. Only Zimmerman, Samuel, and my grandfather knew the true purpose." They walked for nearly 10 minutes before reaching the main laboratory complex. When Mrs. Chen activated the lighting system, Ben felt his breath catch at the scope of what had been hidden beneath the cemetery. The facility was enormous. Multiple chambers connected by corridors, each one dedicated to different aspects of Zimmerman's research. Workshop areas contained equipment that looked decades ahead of its time, even by modern standards. Climate-controlled storage rooms held materials and components that had been preserved in perfect condition since the 1950s. But it was the central laboratory that took Ben's breath away. The room was dominated by a device that looked like a cross between a pipe organ and the most complex clockwork mechanism ever conceived. Hundreds of precision-crafted components worked together in perfect synchronization, driven by a power source that Ben couldn't identify. "The master chronometer," Mrs. Chen said softly, "Zimmerman's greatest achievement and the reason so many people have been searching for his work." Max approached the device with the reverence of someone entering a cathedral. The chronometer was beautiful in ways that transcended mere engineering. Every surface was covered with intricate engravings. Every component was crafted with artistic as well as functional precision. "It's running," Max said with wonder. "After all these years, it's still running." Indeed, the device was operational, its countless moving parts maintaining perfect time with accuracy that made modern atomic clocks look primitive. But Ben could see that it was more than just a timepiece. Additional components seemed designed for functions he couldn't begin to understand. "Zimmerman designed it to be self-maintaining," Mrs. Chen explained. "The power source uses principles that weren't officially discovered until the 1970s, and the regulatory mechanisms are so precise that they've been running without adjustment for 70 years. She led them to a control station where leather-bound logs recorded the device's operation. The entries, written in multiple hands over the decades, showed that someone had been monitoring the chronometer regularly. First Zimmerman himself, then Samuel, then Mrs. Chen's grandfather, and finally Mrs. Chen herself. "You've been coming here all this time?" Ben asked. "Once a month for routine maintenance and monitoring," she replied. "It was my inherited responsibility, just as protecting the secret was your grandfather's." Max was studying the control panels with the same intensity he'd brought to all of Zimmerman's work. "Mrs. Chen, what does this machine actually do? I mean, beyond just keeping perfect time?" She smiled at the boy's question, the first genuine warmth Ben had seen from her since her revelation about her true identity. "It keeps time, yes, but it also maintains a record of everything that has happened since it was activated. Every significant event, every change in the environment, every variation in the Earth's magnetic field or gravitational constant, all of it is recorded with perfect precision. It's like a memory machine," Max breathed. "More than that," Mrs. Chen continued, "the chronometer can predict future variations based on the patterns it has observed. Weather changes, seismic activity, even solar radiation fluctuations. Zimmerman designed it to see patterns that human observation could never detect. Ben felt overwhelmed by the implications. You're talking about a machine that can predict the future, within certain parameters. Yes, Mrs. Chen confirmed, but that's not even its most important capability. She led them to another section of the laboratory, where additional equipment surrounded what appeared to be a communication station. Radio equipment from the 1950s sat alongside devices that looked like they belonged in a modern electronics laboratory. The master chronometer can synchronize with other chronometers anywhere in the world, she explained. Perfect timing coordination across any distance, immune to electromagnetic interference or physical obstacles. Zimmerman created the foundation for communication and navigation systems that wouldn't become theoretically possible for another 50 years. And that's what everyone's been looking for, Ben realized. Not just the technology, but a working system that's been operational for 70 years. Exactly, Mrs. Chen said. The prototype you found at the station is valuable, but this facility contains a complete network that could revolutionize every aspect of human technology. Max was examining a wall covered with charts and calculations that traced global events and their correlation with chronometric measurements. Mrs. Chen, has this machine ever predicted anything important? She hesitated, then led them to a secured file cabinet. Zimmerman's final instructions were that certain predictions should only be revealed if the chronometer's guardianship passed to someone with the wisdom to use them properly. The files she showed them contained predictions that had proven accurate with startling precision. Weather patterns, economic fluctuations, even political changes that had occurred exactly as the chronometer's calculations had indicated. The CC machine predicted the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1963, Mrs. Chen said quietly. It calculated the exact year of the Berlin Wall's fall in 1967. It has been mapping the patterns of human civilization for 7 decades. Ben stared at the prediction files, understanding that they were looking at technology that could reshape not just navigation or communication, but human understanding of how the world worked. So what happens now? He asked. What did Zimmerman want us to do with all this? Mrs. Chen closed the files carefully. That, Mr. Travers, is entirely up to you. You are now the guardian of the most advanced technology on Earth. The question is, what kind of world do you want to help create? Outside the hidden laboratory, Ben knew that people were searching for them, that powerful forces were converging on their small town, and that the decisions he made in the next few days would affect not just his and Max's future, but possibly the future of human civilization itself. The weight of that responsibility was terrifying, but as he watched Max studying Zimmerman's masterwork with wonder and respect, Ben felt something else. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to use this incredible gift for the good of everyone. They returned to the apartment before dawn, but Ben could tell something was wrong the moment they reached their floor. The door to their apartment stood slightly ajar, and light spilled from the crack into the hallway. Mrs. Chen noticed it too, immediately moving to position herself between Max and the door. Her transformation from elderly neighbor to protective guardian was complete. Ben saw the steel in her eyes that came from decades of guarding dangerous secrets. "Stay behind me," she whispered, producing a small pistol from her purse with practiced efficiency. Ben's heart raced as they approached the apartment cautiously. Through the crack in the door, he could hear voices, calm, professional conversation, that suggested their visitors felt completely at home in the space. "Mr. Travers," Dr. Reeves' voice called from inside the apartment. "Please come in. We need to talk." Mrs. Chen hesitated, then holstered her weapon. "They know we're here anyway," she murmured, "and running will only make things worse." They entered, to find 3 people waiting in their living room. Dr. Reeves was a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed and carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Two men flanked her, one young and obviously military, the other older with the patient bearing of a career intelligence officer. "Mr. Travers, Max," Dr. Reeves said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And Mrs. Chen, we've been looking forward to meeting you properly. You broke into our home," Ben said, trying to keep anger from overwhelming his fear. "We used our key," the older man corrected politely, holding up a set of lockpicks. "Technically, we're here on official business." Dr. Reeves gestured for them to sit down in their own living room. The surreal nature of the situation would have been comical if not for the obvious competence of their uninvited guests. "Let me introduce myself properly," Dr. Reeves said. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, Director of Advanced Recovery Operations for the Department of Defense. This is Colonel Martinez and Agent Foster. We represent a task force that has been searching for Heinrich Zimmermann's work since 1952. Mrs. Chen told us the project was cancelled," Ben said carefully. "The official project was cancelled," Dr. Reeves confirmed, "but certain elements within the government never accepted that decision. We have been operating with congressional authorization to locate and secure Zimmermann's technology for national security purposes." Agent Foster opened a briefcase and removed a thick file. "Mr. Travers, your grandfather Samuel was not just a railroad employee. He was a government asset tasked with protecting classified materials until they could be properly secured." Ben felt the ground shifting beneath him as Foster laid out documents that painted a completely different picture of Samuel's life. Security clearance forms, regular reports to government handlers, and most shocking of all, a letter of commendation for extraordinary service in protecting vital national interests. Samuel was a patriot who understood that some secrets are too important to be lost, Dr. Reeves continued. But he was also cautious to a fault. He kept stalling, insisting that the time wasn't right for the technology to be released. "Maybe he was right," Max said quietly, but his voice carried a strength that made the adults in the room pay attention. "Maybe some things should stay hidden until people are wise enough to use them properly." Colonel Martinez leaned forward, addressing Max with surprising respect. "Son, the world has changed a lot since 1952. We're facing threats that Zimmermann and your great-grandfather never imagined. This technology could protect millions of lives, or destroy them," Mrs. Chen said firmly. Heinrich was very clear about the dangers of weaponizing his work. Dr. Reeves's expression hardened slightly. "Mrs. Chen, you've done admirable work maintaining the secret all these years, but the decision about how to use this technology isn't yours to make anymore." She produced another document from Foster's briefcase, a court order signed by a federal judge authorizing the seizure of all materials related to Project Kronos as matters of national security. "We're not here to steal anything," Dr. Reeves said. "We're here to reclaim government property that was never legally transferred to private ownership." Ben felt trapped, but something about the woman's manner bothered him. Her story was plausible. Her documentation looked authentic, but there was something in her eyes that reminded him more of a corporate acquisition specialist than a government scientist. "Dr. Reeves," Ben said slowly, "what exactly do you plan to do with Zimmermann's technology once you have it?" "Initially, we'll need to conduct extensive testing and analysis," she replied. "The military applications alone could revolutionize defense capabilities. Precision navigation for submarines, communication systems that can't be jammed or intercepted, timing devices that could coordinate operations with perfect synchronization." "And after that?" Max asked. Dr. Reeves hesitated for just a moment. Long. Enough for Ben to catch the flicker of something calculating in her expression. "After that, we'll determine the most appropriate applications for national security purposes," she said. Mrs. Chen had been quiet during this exchange, but Ben could see her studying their visitors with the intensity of someone solving a complex puzzle. Finally she spoke. "Dr. Reeves, what was the name of Heinrich Zimmermann's cat?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Dr. Reeves looked momentarily confused. "I'm sorry, his cat," Mrs. Chen repeated calmly. Heinrich kept extensive personal journals. Anyone who had legitimate access to his files would know about his cat. What was its name? Dr. Reeves glanced at her colleagues, clearly annoyed by the unexpected question. Mrs. Chen, I don't think domestic details are relevant to our mission. Einstein, Max said suddenly, remembering something from the journals they'd been reading. The cat's name was Einstein. Zimmerman wrote about how the cat would sit on his workbench while he was calculating, and how it seemed to understand the rhythm of his work. Mrs. Chen smiled grimly. Very good, Max. Dr. Reeves, if you truly represent the government agency that commissioned Heinrich's work, you would have access to his complete files, including his personal journals. The fact that you don't know such a basic detail suggests your credentials might not be quite what they appear to be. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Colonel Martinez's hand moved subtly toward his jacket, and Agent Foster's casual posture became more alert. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Reeves said, her friendly mask slipping away entirely, I think you're overcomplicating a simple situation. Am I? Mrs. Chen asked. Because there's something else that's been bothering me. You claim to represent a government task force that's been searching for Heinrich's work since 1952. But if that were true, you would have approached Samuel decades ago, when he was still alive and able to cooperate. Why wait until after his death to make contact? Ben felt the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. You're not government at all, are you? Dr. Reeves' expression became cold and businesslike. Mr. Travers, it really doesn't matter who we represent. What matters is that we have the resources and authority to take what we've come for, with or without your cooperation. Actually, a new voice said from the apartment's doorway, it matters quite a lot. They turned to see a man in his 60s, wearing a rumpled suit and carrying a worn leather briefcase. He looked like a small-town lawyer, but something in his bearing suggested otherwise. Agent Walker, FBI, the man said, producing credentials that looked far more authentic than anything Dr. Reeves had shown them. And you, Dr. Reeves, are under arrest for impersonating federal officers and conspiracy to steal classified government property. The room erupted into motion. Colonel Martinez went for his weapon, but Mrs. Chen was faster, producing her pistol and firing a warning shot into the ceiling that froze everyone in place. I was wondering when the real government would show up, she said calmly. Agent Walker, I assume you're part of the legitimate recovery operation? Yes, ma'am, Walker replied, keeping his own weapon trained on Dr. Reeves's team. We've been tracking this group for 6 months. They represent a consortium of private military contractors and foreign intelligence services trying to acquire Zimmerman's technology for commercial purposes. Dr. Reeves's mask had fallen away completely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Agent Walker, you have no idea what forces you're interfering with. This technology is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. People have died for far less. And more people will die if it falls into the wrong hands, Walker replied, which is exactly why the real Department of Defense has authorized me to recover it and place it under proper protection. Ben looked from Walker to Dr. Reeves to Mrs. Chen, trying to determine who was telling the truth and who represented the greatest threat to his family's safety. How do we know you're any more legitimate than they are? Ben asked Walker. The FBI agent smiled grimly. Because, Mr. Travers, Heinrich Zimmerman's cat wasn't named Einstein. It was named Schrödinger, after the physicist. And it was a she, not a he. Mrs. Chen lowered her weapon slightly. That's correct, Agent Walker, but there's still one thing that would convince me you represent the people Heinrich and Samuel would have trusted. What's that, Mrs. Chen? What was the real reason Project Kronos was cancelled in 1952? Walker was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the weight of someone who had studied classified files for decades. Because Heinrich Zimmerman himself requested the cancellation, he said quietly. He realized that his technology was so far ahead of its time that it would inevitably be weaponized. He convinced the government that it was safer to hide the work until humanity had evolved enough to use it responsibly. And how long did he think that would take? Max asked. Agent Walker looked at the boy with respect. According to his final report, at least 75 years, until sometime around 2027. Ben felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. Zimmerman hadn't just hidden his technology, he had calculated exactly when it would be safe to reveal it. And that time was now. The confrontation in their apartment ended with Dr. Reeves and her team in federal custody. But Agent Walker's news that they represented only one of several groups searching for Zimmerman's technology left Ben feeling more vulnerable than ever. "How many others are there?" Ben asked as they watched the fake government agents being led away in handcuffs. "At least 2 more groups that we know of," Walker replied grimly. "A Chinese intelligence operation that's been tracking Zimmerman's work since the 1960s, and a consortium of European defense contractors who believe the technology could revolutionize their aerospace programs." Mrs. Chen was cleaning her pistol with the practiced efficiency of someone who had handled firearms far longer than Ben would have guessed. "Agent Walker, what does your government want us to do?" "Officially, turn everything over to federal custody for evaluation and classification," Walker said. "Unofficially, I've read Zimmerman's files, all of them. I think the old man was right to hide this technology until now." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "The problem is, my superiors don't necessarily agree with Zimmerman's assessment. There are people in Washington who believe we need every possible technological advantage, regardless of the risks." Max had been quiet during the arrest, but Ben could see him processing everything with the intensity that meant he was working towards some kind of conclusion. "Agent Walker," Max said finally, "what would happen if we just destroyed everything? Made sure nobody could use it for bad purposes?" Walker looked at the boy with something approaching admiration. "That's probably the safest option, son. But it would also mean losing technology that could benefit humanity in ways we can't even imagine yet." Ben felt torn between his protective instincts as a father and his growing understanding of the responsibility Samuel had passed to him. The easy path would be to turn everything over to Walker's people and walk away. But something in Zimmerman's journals suggested that wasn't what the old scientist had intended. "Agent Walker," Ben said slowly, "you mentioned that Zimmerman calculated the technology would be safe to reveal around 2027. Did he leave any guidance about how it should be revealed?" Walker nodded and pulled out another document. "He was very specific about that. The technology should be released through international cooperation, with oversight from multiple nations to prevent any single country from gaining decisive military advantage." "Sounds like the United Nations," Mrs. Chen observed. "Or something like it," Walker agreed. "Zimmerman envisioned a scientific consortium that could develop the peaceful applications while maintaining strict controls on military uses. They were interrupted by a soft chiming sound that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Mrs. Chen's expression grew alert, and she moved toward the window to peer through the curtains. "What was that?" Ben asked. "Warning system," Mrs. Chen replied. "Dursley, Zimmerman designed it to alert us if anyone approaches the underground facilities." She produced a device that looked like a miniature version of Zimmerman's chronometer from her purse. Its multiple dials were showing readings that meant nothing to Ben, but clearly conveyed urgency to Mrs. Chen. "Someone's at the cemetery facility," she said. "Multiple people with electronic detection equipment." Agent Walker was immediately on his radio calling for backup, but even as he coordinated federal response, Ben could see the futility of their situation. The underground laboratories were too large and complex to be adequately guarded, and there were too many people who wanted what was hidden there. "We need to get there first," Ben said, "before anyone else finds the master chronometer." "Dad, that's dangerous," Max protested, though his eyes showed the same mixture of fear and determination that Ben was feeling. "Everything's dangerous now," Ben replied. "But if we don't take control of this situation, someone else will." Mrs. Chen was studying her chronometer device with the focus of someone making a critical decision. "Agent Walker, how long before your backup arrives?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. "Too long," she said flatly. "By then, they could have accessed the main laboratory." She moved toward the door with purpose. "Ben, Max, we're going to the cemetery. Agent Walker, you can follow." As or not, but this ends tonight. The drive to the cemetery was surreal. Agent Walker followed them in his government sedan, while Mrs. Chen navigated back streets with the skill of someone who had planned these routes decades in advance. Max sat in the passenger seat, clutching Zimmerman's pocket watch and studying its readings with growing understanding. "Mrs. Chen," Max said as they approached the cemetery, "the chronometer is showing patterns I haven't seen before. Like it's detecting something the master chronometer isn't supposed to be doing." "What do you mean?" Ben asked. "Look at these readings." Max showed them the device's multiple dials. "The magnetic field measurements are fluctuating in ways that match some of Zimmerman's theoretical calculations. I think someone has activated systems in the laboratory that haven't been used since the 1950s. Mrs. Chen's expression grew grim. "That's not good. Some of Zimmerman's experimental equipment was designed to be operated only under very specific conditions. If someone without proper knowledge tries to use it, what happens?" Ben asked. "The master chronometer could become unstable," she replied. "The precision systems that have been maintaining perfect time for 70 years could be disrupted, and that would be bad because—" Max answered before Mrs. Chen could speak. "Because the chronometer isn't just keeping track of time, Dad. It's maintaining calibration for every system Zimmerman ever built. If it goes unstable, all of his technology could become dangerous." They reached the cemetery to find it crawling with activity. Unmarked vans were parked near the maintenance building, and figures with professional equipment were moving between the headstones with military precision. "Chinese?" Agent Walker asked, studying the intruders through binoculars. "Most likely," Mrs. Chen confirmed. "They've been patient, but they're also thorough. Once they learned that others were moving on the technology, they would want to claim it before anyone else could." Ben watched the organized efficiency of the operation and felt overwhelmed by the forces they were facing. "How are we supposed to stop them?" "We don't stop them," Mrs. Chen said with calm determination. "We get there first." She led them to a part of the cemetery Ben hadn't known existed, a section behind the main burial grounds where older, unmarked graves created a maze of overgrown paths and forgotten monuments. "Zimmerman was paranoid about security," she explained, as they picked their way through the darkness. "He built multiple access points to the laboratory, known only to the Guardians. The alternative entrance was hidden beneath what appeared to be a collapsed mausoleum from the 1800s. Mrs. Chen manipulated a sequence of hidden mechanisms, and a section of the structure rotated away to reveal stairs leading downward. "This tunnel connects to the main laboratory from the opposite side," she said. "We can reach the master chronometer before they do, but we need to move quickly." They descended into a passage that was older and more primitive than the tunnels beneath the train station. This route had been carved from solid rock, with minimal lighting and rough-hewn walls that spoke of urgent, secretive construction. Agent Walker stayed close behind them, his weapon drawn and his radio crackling with updates from his backup team. The federal agents were trying to coordinate a response, but the intruders had chosen their timing well. Most law enforcement resources were committed to other operations, leaving Walker's team understaffed for the scale of what they were facing. "How much further?" Ben asked as they navigated a particularly narrow section of the tunnel. "Almost there," Mrs. Chen replied, but her voice carried tension that hadn't been there before. They emerged into the main laboratory to find it lit and active. The master chronometer was running at higher intensity than Ben had seen before, its countless components moving faster and generating a subtle harmonic resonance that seemed to fill the entire facility. But they weren't alone. A team of 6 people in black tactical gear was systematically documenting and preparing to remove Zimmerman's equipment. Their leader, A woman with short grey hair and the bearing of a career military officer looked up as Ben's group entered. "The chamber. Mrs. Chen," she said in accented English that confirmed Walker's assessment of their nationality. "We have been hoping to meet you for a very long time." "Colonel Liu," Mrs. Chen replied with resignation. "I was wondering when Beijing would decide to make its move. The situation has become too unstable to wait any longer," Liu said. "Too many parties are now aware of Dr. Zimmerman's work. It is time for it to be placed under proper protection." "Agent?" Walker stepped forward, his FBI credentials clearly visible. "Colonel, you're operating on U.S. soil without authorization. I'm ordering you to stand down immediately." Liu smiled politely. "Agent Walker, I believe there may be some confusion about jurisdiction. This facility exists in international waters according to the treaties governing underground installations that cross national boundaries." "That's ridiculous," Walker said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Actually," Max said quietly, studying Zimmerman's pocket watch, "she might be right." Everyone turned to look at the boy, who was examining the chronometer's readings with the focus that meant he was solving a complex puzzle. "According to these measurements," Max continued, "this laboratory is positioned directly beneath the underground river system that forms the border between the US and Canada. Technically, we might be in disputed territory." Ben felt the situation slipping away from them as legal complexities layered onto an already impossible scenario. But Mrs. Chen was studying the master chronometer with growing alarm. "None of that matters right now," she said urgently. "Look at the synchronization readings." She pointed to a section of the massive device where indicators were flashing in patterns that clearly signaled distress. "Someone has been trying to access the prediction protocols without proper authorization codes. The entire system is becoming unstable." Colonel Liu's team had been working methodically to disconnect and remove components from Zimmerman's equipment, but their lack of understanding about the interconnected nature of the systems was causing cascading failures throughout the laboratory. "You need to stop what you're doing," Ben said to Liu. "This isn't just valuable technology, it's a delicate system that's been maintaining itself for 70 years. If you disrupt it incorrectly—" "We have our own technical experts," Liu interrupted, gesturing toward a man who was attacking the chronometer's control systems with electronic equipment that looked decades more advanced than anything Zimmerman had built. "But do they understand the principles?" Max asked, his young voice cutting through the tension with surprising authority. "This machine doesn't work like modern computers. It's based on mechanical principles that interact with quantum effects in ways that weren't even theoretical until the 1990s. The Chinese technician looked up from his work, clearly frustrated by the complexity of what he was trying to decode. "The control systems are unlike anything in our databases," he admitted to Colonel Liu. "The mathematical principles appear to be based on theoretical work that may not have been published." Mrs. Chen moved toward the master chronometer with the calm determination of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire adult life. "Because Heinrich kept his most important discoveries secret," she said. "The mathematical foundations of the chronometer are based on principles he developed but never shared with anyone except Samuel and my grandfather." She began working with the chronometer's controls, her fingers moving across the brass mechanisms. With the confidence of decades of practice, the system is trying to prevent unauthorized access by increasing its operational intensity. If it continues accelerating, the precision mechanisms could be damaged beyond repair. "Then shut it down," Agent Walker suggested. "It can't be shut down," Mrs. Chen replied grimly. "Heinrich designed it to be self-perpetuating. The only way to stop it safely is to provide it with the correct authorization codes." "Which you have?" Colonel Liu asked. "Which are encoded in devices that are scattered across multiple locations," Mrs. Chen said. "Heinrich was paranoid about security. No single person was ever supposed to have complete control over the system." Ben felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The pocket watch, The chronometer we found at the station, the brass ticket, a punch. They're all parts of the same security system, aren't they? Exactly, Mrs. Chen confirmed, and without all of them working together, the master chronometer will continue accelerating until it destroys itself. The harmonic resonance from the device was growing stronger, creating vibrations that Ben could feel in his bones. Whatever was happening, it was building toward some kind of critical threshold. How long do we have? Agent Walker asked. Mrs. Chen checked readings on multiple instruments before answering. At current rate of acceleration, maybe 2 hours before. The system reaches critical instability. And then what happens? Then 7 decades of the most advanced scientific research in human history is lost forever, she said, along with predictions and calculations that could guide humanity's development for the next century. Colonel Liu was conferring urgently with her team, clearly torn between the value of what they were trying to acquire and the risk of losing it entirely through their actions. Mrs. Chen, she said finally, what would it take to stabilize the system? Cooperation, Mrs. Chen replied. Simply, Heinrich designed the security protocols to require multiple parties working together. No single nation or organization was ever supposed to control this technology alone. Ben looked around the laboratory at the representatives of at least 3. Different interests, FBI, Chinese intelligence, and whatever Mrs. Chen represented, and realized that Zimmerman had anticipated this exact scenario. The old scientist hadn't just hidden his technology. He had engineered a situation that would force cooperation between potential adversaries. So what do we do? Ben asked. Mrs. Chen smiled for the first time since they'd entered the laboratory. We do exactly what Heinrich intended, she said. We work together to save something too valuable to lose. But even as she spoke, Ben could hear sounds echoing through the tunnels that suggested their window for cooperation might be closing rapidly. Other forces were converging on the laboratory, and not all of them would be interested in Zimmerman's vision of international collaboration. The real test was about to begin. The sounds echoing through the tunnels resolved into footsteps and voices as the European consortium that Agent Walker had warned them about arrived at the laboratory. Ben watched through the main entrance as a team of 8 people in expensive tactical gear made their way toward the central chamber, led by a man whose bearing suggested corporate boardrooms rather than military operations. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves wasn't the only one with funding and resources, Walker muttered, positioning himself where he could cover both entrances to the laboratory. Mrs. Chen was working frantically with the master chronometer's controls, trying to slow its acceleration, while Colonel Liu's technician attempted to understand the system well enough to help stabilize it. The unlikely cooperation was their only hope of preventing the destruction of 70 years of scientific advancement. Max, Mrs. Chen called urgently, I need you to use the pocket watch to synchronize with the primary timing mechanism. The readings need to match exactly, or the system won't recognize the authorization codes. Max moved to the chronometer with the focused intensity that Ben had learned to respect. Despite his age, the boy seemed to understand the complex device better than most adults could comprehend it. Like this? Max asked, adjusting dials on Zimmerman's pocket watch until its readings aligned with indicators on the master chronometer. Perfect, Mrs. Chen confirmed. Now, Ben, you need to use the station chronometer to establish the secondary authentication sequence. Ben fumbled with the device they had found in Zimmerman's workshop, trying to match the precise timing that Mrs. Chen was orchestrating. The responsibility of potentially saving or destroying priceless technology made his hands shake, but gradually he found the rhythm of the system. The European team entered the laboratory just as the master chronometer began showing signs of stabilization. Their leader, a tall man with silver hair and expensive clothes, surveyed the scene with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to acquiring valuable assets. Ladies and gentlemen, he said in crisp British English, I am Jonathan Blackwood, representing the Meridian Aerospace Consortium. I believe you have something that belongs to our organization. Nothing here belongs to you, Blackwood, Agent Walker replied firmly. Actually, Agent Walker, our legal research suggests otherwise, Blackwood said, producing a briefcase full of documents. Heinrich Zimmermann was working under contracts that included clauses transferring intellectual property rights to designated successors in the event of project termination. Colonel Liu looked up from her team's work with the chronometer. Mr. Blackwood, your claims are irrelevant if the technology destroys itself while we argue about ownership. Blackwood's corporate confidence wavered as he noticed the intensity of activity around the master chronometer and the harmonic resonance that was making the entire laboratory vibrate. What exactly is happening? He asked. Your predecessors attempt to acquire the technology by force-triggered security protocols, Mrs. Chen explained, without looking up from her work. The system is trying to protect itself by accelerating beyond safe operational parameters. And if it continues, then everyone loses, Max said simply, his attention focused on maintaining synchronization between the pocket watch and the master system. Blackwood's team included technical specialists who quickly grasped the severity of the situation. One of them, a woman with the bearing of an aerospace engineer, approached the chronometer with professional respect. This is extraordinary, she breathed, studying the device's construction. The precision engineering is decades ahead of anything in our current systems. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Blackwood introduced her. She's one of the world's leading experts on precision timing systems. Dr. Mitchell was examining the chronometer's components with growing amazement. Mr. Blackwood, this technology isn't just valuable. It could revolutionize every aspect of modern navigation and communication, but it's also incredibly delicate. Any attempt to acquire it by force could destroy capabilities we won't be able to reproduce for decades. Ben watched the interplay of competing interests and growing understanding with fascination. Zimmermann had engineered a situation where greed would be self-defeating, where the only way to benefit from his technology was to approach it with wisdom and cooperation. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Mitchell said respectfully, what would it take to stabilize the system and preserve this technology? Exactly what Heinrich intended from the beginning, Mrs. Chen replied. International cooperation under proper oversight, with no single party gaining exclusive control. The chronometer's harmonic resonance was gradually diminishing as their combined efforts brought it back towards stable operation. But Ben could see that the process required constant attention from multiple people working in perfect coordination. This is the test, isn't it? He asked Mrs. Chen. Zimmermann designed the security system to require exactly this kind of cooperation. Heinrich was a very wise man, she confirmed. He understood that technology this powerful could only be safely managed by people who were willing to work together despite their differences. Agent Walker lowered his weapon as he realized that the situation had evolved beyond simple law enforcement. So what happens now? Colonel Liu, Dr. Mitchell, Mrs. Chen, and Agent Walker looked at each other with the wary respect of adversaries who had discovered a common interest in preserving something greater than their individual agendas. Now, Mrs. Chen said, we do what Heinrich always intended. We form the consortium he envisioned to develop this technology for peaceful purposes. But even as she spoke, the sound of additional vehicles arriving outside the cemetery suggested that their window for peaceful resolution might be closing rapidly. The sound of heavy vehicles and coordinated movement above ground told Ben that their fragile cooperation was about to face its ultimate test. Agent Walker's radio crackled with updates from his backup team, and the news wasn't encouraging. Multiple agencies are converging on the site, Walker reported grimly. NSA, CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, plus what looks like private military contractors. Somebody leaked the location, and now everyone wants a piece of this. Colonel Liu was coordinating with her own people through a secure communication device. Beijing has authorized me to defend our position, she said quietly, but they also want the technology secured before it falls into unauthorized hands. Dr. Mitchell looked up from her examination of the chronometer with professional excitement that transcended national loyalties. This is bigger than any one country's interests, she said urgently. Dr. Zimmerman's work could advance human civilization by decades. It would be criminal to let it be destroyed by territorial disputes. Mrs. Chen had moved to a control panel that Ben hadn't noticed before, one that seemed to govern security systems throughout the facility. Heinrich anticipated this possibility, she said, her fingers moving across switches and dials with practiced precision. He built defenses into the laboratory that can protect the technology, but only if we're willing to commit to his vision of international cooperation. What kind of defenses? Agent Walker asked warily. The facility can be sealed and isolated from external interference, she explained. But once the security protocols are activated, they can only be deactivated by unanimous consent from all parties present. Ben felt the weight of decision settling on them. You're talking about locking ourselves in here with the technology until we can figure out a way to honor Zimmerman's intentions. Exactly, Mrs. Chen confirmed. We become the guardians he envisioned, protecting the technology from those who would abuse it while working together to develop its peaceful applications. The sounds from above were getting closer, and Ben could hear the distinctive noise of heavy equipment being deployed. Whatever forces were converging on the cemetery, they were prepared for a significant operation. Max had been quietly working with the pocket watch and master chronometer, but now he looked up with the expression that meant he'd discovered something important. Mrs. Chen, he said urgently, the chronometer is showing prediction patterns that I haven't seen before. It's calculating something based on current events. What kind of predictions? Dr. Mitchell asked, moving to examine the displays. Max was indicating the master chronometer's multiple screens were showing complex calculations that seemed to be processing real-time data about the forces gathering above them. Maps appeared and shifted, showing tactical positions and movement patterns with uncanny accuracy. It's tracking the people outside, Max said with wonder. It's calculating their intentions based on their positioning and movement patterns. Colonel Liu studied the displays with professional interest. The technology is more advanced than we realized. This isn't just navigation and timing, it's comprehensive situational analysis. The chronometer's predictions were disturbing. According to its calculations, the various agencies and private contractors gathering outside had conflicting objectives that would likely result in violence if they weren't contained. It's recommending immediate isolation, Mrs. Chen said, reading the machine's conclusions. Heinrich programmed it to prioritize preservation of the technology above all other considerations. Agent Walker was coordinating with his team through his radio, trying to establish some kind of order among the competing forces outside. But Ben could hear the frustration in his voice as different agencies asserted conflicting jurisdictions and priorities. Mrs. Chen, Ben said quietly, if we activate Zimmerman's security protocols, how long would we be locked in here? Until the outside situation stabilizes, she replied. The system will monitor external conditions and only allow egress when it calculates that the technology can be safely transferred to appropriate oversight. And food, water, power. Heinrich planned for extended occupation, she assured him. This facility can support 12 people for several months if necessary. Ben looked around at the representatives of different nations and interests who had found themselves working together to preserve something greater than their individual agendas. It wasn't the life he'd planned for himself or Max, but it might be the responsibility that Samuel and Zimmerman had always intended for their family to accept. Dad, Max said, his young voice carrying the wisdom that continued to amaze Ben, I think we should do what Great-Grandpa Samuel and Mr. Zimmerman wanted. We should protect this until people are smart enough to use it right. Dr. Mitchell nodded firmly. The boy's right. This technology could transform human civilization, but only if it's developed responsibly. Colonel Liu looked conflicted, clearly, torn between her orders from Beijing and her growing understanding of the technology's true significance. Finally, she spoke. "My government wants me to secure this technology for China," she said slowly. "But after seeing what Heinrich Zimmermann created, I believe his vision of international cooperation may be the only way to prevent its abuse." Agent Walker set down his radio with a decisive gesture. "My orders are to recover classified technology for national security purposes, but sometimes national security means making sure certain technologies aren't used for destructive purposes." Mrs. Chen smiled with satisfaction at the consensus that was emerging. "Then we're agreed. We activate Heinrich's security protocols and become the consortium he envisioned." Ben felt the weight of inherited responsibility settling on his shoulders as Mrs. Chen's hand moved toward the final activation switch. Once she pressed it, there would be no turning back. They would become the guardians of technology that could change the world, for better or for worse. 6 months later, Ben stood in the restored Millbrook Station watching Max demonstrate Heinrich Zimmermann's pocket watch to a group of international delegates. The boy had become something of an expert on chronometric technology, able to explain complex timing principles with the clarity that came from genuine understanding. The station itself had been transformed from an abandoned relic into a thriving center for international scientific cooperation. The main waiting area housed exhibits explaining the history of Project Kronos and Heinrich Zimmermann's vision of technology developed for peaceful purposes. The old ticket booth had been converted into a classroom where students from around the world came to learn about precision engineering and its applications. But the real work happened in the underground laboratories, where teams of scientists from 12 different countries collaborated on developing Zimmermann's principles for civilian use. The master chronometer had been stabilized and was now serving as the foundation for navigation systems that would make GPS technology look primitive by comparison. The key insight, Max was explaining to a delegation of educators, is that Dr. Zimmermann wasn't just making clocks. He was creating a way for humans to understand their relationship with time itself. Ben smiled as he listened to his son's presentation. Max had grown 6 inches and gained confidence that transformed him from a curious boy into a young teacher who could hold adults' attention while explaining concepts that most engineers found challenging. Mrs. Chen approached from the direction of the platform, where the old passenger car had been restored to serve as additional meeting space. At 75, she moved with the energy of someone who had finally found the purpose she'd been preparing for her entire life. "The afternoon session went well," she reported. "The European team thinks they can adapt the chronometric principles for earthquake prediction systems within 2 years, and the Chinese group, they're making remarkable progress on the underwater navigation applications," she said. "Colonel Liu thinks submarine rescue operations could be revolutionized within 18 months, Ben nodded with satisfaction. The international consortium they'd formed during those tense hours in the underground laboratory had evolved into something Heinrich Zimmermann would have been proud of. 12 nations working together, sharing technology and discoveries, with no single country gaining military advantage over the others. The transformed station was more than just a research facility. It had become a symbol of what cooperation could accomplish when people set aside territorial interests in favor of common goals. Agent Walker emerged from the administrative offices that had been built in the station's former freight areas. His role had evolved from law enforcement to coordination, helping to navigate the complex legal and diplomatic issues that arose when multiple governments shared control of revolutionary technology. "The UN Oversight Committee approved the next phase of development," he announced. "Full funding for the Global Navigation Enhancement Project, with deployment beginning next year." Ben felt a deep satisfaction at how far they'd come from that. Terrifying night, when competing forces had nearly destroyed Zimmerman's lifework. The decision to lock themselves in the underground laboratory until they could reach consensus had ultimately lasted only 3 days. But those 3 days had established principles that continued to guide their work. The key had been Mrs. Chen's insistence that any use of Zimmerman's technology required unanimous consent from all consortium members. It was cumbersome and sometimes frustrating, but it forced them to find applications that served everyone's interests rather than pursuing narrow national advantages. Dr. Mitchell appeared from the direction of the tunnel entrance, her usual professional composure replaced by obvious excitement. "Ben, you need to see this," she said urgently. "We've had a breakthrough with the prediction protocols." They made their way down to the master chronometer, which had been enhanced with modern computing systems while maintaining its original mechanical precision. The combination of Zimmerman's clockwork and 21st century electronics had created capabilities that neither could have achieved alone. "Show him what we discovered," Dr. Mitchell said to the technician monitoring the system. The main display screen showed a world map overlaid with probability calculations that shifted and evolved in real time. Weather patterns, seismic activity, economic fluctuations, even social and political trends were being tracked and predicted with accuracy that bordered on prescience. "The chronometer has been learning," the technician explained, "not just recording patterns, but understanding the relationships between different types of events. It's becoming more accurate at predictions the longer it operates." Ben studied the display with amazement. How accurate! Earthquake predictions within plus or minus 6 hours, weather patterns 5 days in advance, economic trends with 87% accuracy over 6-month periods, Dr. Mitchell replied, "and it's getting better every week." The implications were staggering. Disaster relief organizations could prepare for natural catastrophes with unprecedented advance warning. Agricultural systems could optimize planting and harvesting based on precise weather predictions. Economic instability could be identified and addressed before it caused widespread hardship. Heinrich was right to hide this technology until humanity was ready for it, Ben murmured. Max joined them at the chronometer, having finished his presentation to the international delegates. At 11 years old, he had become the youngest member of the consortium, but his insights into Zimmerman's work often surpassed those of adult scientists with decades of experience. "The machine is teaching us something else too," Max said, pointing to calculations that tracked global cooperation patterns. "It's showing us that the more countries work together, the more stable and predictable the future becomes." Mrs. Chen smiled at the boy's observation. "Heinrich would have loved that discovery," she said. "He always believed that cooperation was the key to human advancement." As evening approached, Ben found himself standing on the restored platform where trains had once carried passengers to distant cities. Now the platform served as a gathering place for scientists and diplomats from around the world, but the sense of journeys beginning and destinations reached remained unchanged. Max joined him as the last of the day's visitors departed for their hotels in town. The boy had inherited his mother's ability to find quiet moments for reflection, even in the midst of busy days. "Dad," Max said, looking out at the tracks that stretched toward the horizon, "do you think Mom would be proud of what we're doing?" Ben put his arm around his son's shoulders, thinking of Sarah's belief in curiosity as a gift that should never be discouraged. The path from that first discovery of the hidden trapdoor to their current role as guardians of world-changing technology hadn't been what he'd planned for their lives, but it had led them to something bigger and more important than he'd ever imagined possible. "I think she'd be amazed," Ben said quietly, "just like I am every day." Above them, the restored station. Clock chimed 6 o'clock with precision that would have satisfied Heinrich Zimmermann himself. The sound echoed across the platform and into the growing dusk, marking not just the passage of time, but the continuation of a legacy that promised to guide humanity toward a more cooperative and hopeful future. In a place where time had once stopped, a father and son had indeed found the key to starting over, not just for themselves, but for the world.